How can it be possible to make a mechanical pendulum clock so accurate that it can pick up on local variations in tide and even detect small earthquakes on the other side of the globe? In this video, I have the daunting task of trying to explain the ideas of John Harrison, and in particular his amazing claim back in the 18th century that he could make a pendulum clock accurate to within 1 second in 100 days. This video is actually also for my own benefit because I'm going to be using these ideas on my current clock, which I hope may be accurate to within 1 second in 10 days. Harrison's ideas were considered to be so outlandish in the 18th century that he was basically dismissed as just a senile old man. And it's only in the 21st century that these ideas have been resurrected and put to such incredible effect in Martin Burgess's Clocks A and Clock B. Clock B was tested at Greenwich in 2016 and was found to be accurate to within 5/8 of a second in 100 days, breaking a world record in the process. So in order to begin to explain the principles of John Harrison, I think it would be useful just to go back through the centuries and see how clocks have developed and increased in accuracy gradually over time. The first mechanical clocks began to appear in 13th century Europe. They were incredibly inaccurate because they didn't have any natural resonator. An accuracy of half an hour a day would have been considered extremely good for these clocks. This is the 14th century Virgin Foliot clock from Salisbury Cathedral. Our story really begins in 1656 when Christian Huygens first came up with the idea of using a pendulum for regulating a mechanical clock. The pendulum provided a natural resonance to the clock. However, the verge escapement required a huge pendulum arc to operate, and accuracy was limited to about a minute per day. Huygens knew that this large arc was a problem due to circular error, which he tried to tame with cycloidal cheeks. These would theoretically produce a pendulum with perfect isochronism. However, they were extremely difficult to make, and imperfections at such large pendulum amplitudes meant that the cheeks never really worked. The invention of the anchor escapement, which required a tiny pendulum arc, was the key to accuracy, and at the beginning of the 18th century, clocks were achieving an accuracy of about 2 seconds in a week. However, it was recognized that there were limitations to the potential accuracy of the pendulum. The three main sources of inaccuracy were changes in air temperature, changes in air pressure, and changes to the driving force of the pendulum. The temperature effect was cleverly compensated for by making the pendulum rod out of alternating lengths of brass and steel. Brass has a higher coefficient of thermal expansion than steel, and it is possible to produce a grid of the brass and steel rods such that the net effect of thermal expansion is zero and the center of mass of the pendulum remains constant. Here you can see in the famous Harrison portrait his gridiron pendulum, which is perhaps the most famous example of this form of temperature compensation. Harrison, through his bell ringing, would have been well aware of the concept of circular deviation, which caused the timings of the bells to alter as their swings varied. With a pendulum, this occurs when the arc of swing varies, which happens when the air pressure or energy input varies. 18th century clockmakers referred to this as circular error because it represented the error that a clock would show if its angle of swing should change, and it was also known that this error was proportional to the square of the angle, so it became way worse for larger angles of swing, and for this reason they kept their clocks swinging with an absolute minimum of angle. Here you can see a clock made by George Graham in 1730. This would have represented the pinnacle of clockmaking at its time, and features the Harrison gridiron pendulum and a huge, heavy, stable bob swinging at a very low arc of about 1.5 degrees aside. Under the best possible conditions, this might have had an accuracy of about 2 seconds a week. Further strivings for accuracy in the 19th and 20th centuries resulted in clocks whose pendulums were isolated from the atmosphere. These were called tank clocks because their pendulums were placed in vacuum tanks. The Riefler clock, shown here with the copper vacuum tank, was made in the 1890s and was accurate to within 5 seconds per year. And the Shortt synchrotron clock, made in the 1920s, had an astonishing accuracy approaching 1 second per year. But we must now go back in time to the mid-18th century, when Harrison was making his bold claims for a clock with an accuracy of 1 second in 100 days, and this was for a pendulum swinging in free exposed air, so it was exposed to all the vagaries of atmospheric and temperature variations. So now John Harrison, this humble carpenter from Humberside, enters the scene, and he proclaims that he can produce a clock that is accurate to within 1 second in 100 days. And I guess we're at that point in the video where I'm going to have to start scratching my head and come up with some ideas of how to explain how this could have been possible. My understanding of Harrisonian compensation has been largely gleaned from the various papers in the book Harrison Decoded, and so I want to dedicate the rest of this video to trying to put those seemingly quite complicated ideas into a fairly simplistic form so that they can be used in clocks that are built by modern clockmakers. Before we come on to Harrison's ingenious barometric compensation methods, we need to just quickly go through some Harrisonian stipulations. First is that there must be no oil anywhere in the system, as oil changes its properties over time, and this can lead to changes in energy transmission throughout the clock. The second is that there must be consistent energy input to the pendulum, and not surprisingly, this can be achieved with the Harrison remontoire. And the third stipulation, which may seem a bit counterintuitive to begin with, is that the pendulum must exhibit high drag. This is for two reasons. Firstly, the pendulum will require high energy input, so it'll be less susceptible to small changes in this energy or localized perturbations. And the second reason for this is that this drag is going to be used as part of the compensating technique for the barometric pressure changes. So we have a pendulum that we believe has perfect temperature compensation. But now let us have a look at what happens if the barometric pressure rises. So the air density will increase, and this will have two distinct effects on the pendulum. The first effect is an increase in buoyancy, which slows the pendulum down, because this increase in buoyancy acts against the restoring force of gravity, which effectively makes the pendulum lighter. And the second effect is an increase in pendulum drag due to the greater air resistance, and this actually reduces the amplitude of swing, and due to circular deviation, this produces a faster moving pendulum. It's important to think of these two effects separately because of their opposite impacts on the pendulum, and when viewed side by side, this becomes very clear. So to summarize, if the barometer rises, the air gets denser, which increases buoyancy, which slows the clock, and the denser air also increases drag, which speeds up the clock. And Harrison's genius was to balance these two effects by introducing a measured amount of circular deviation. I should mention that aerodynamic drag also has a slight damping effect on the restoring force of the pendulum, which causes a slight slowing of the pendulum with increased barometric pressure. However, this effect is very, very small. This amazing balancing act couldn't have worked on a traditional regulator of the 18th century because the effect of drag is actually very small, and with a low amplitude, slow moving pendulum, the effect wouldn't have been nearly enough to counteract the buoyancy. You will remember that Harrison stipulates a high amplitude, fast moving pendulum, and of course drag is proportional to the velocity squared. So the drag is increased sufficiently so that it can be used to compensate for the slowing of the pendulum due to the buoyancy effect. But how do we modify the aerodynamic drag element so that it exactly cancels out the buoyancy effect? This is where circular deviation actually becomes our friend, and by sandwiching the suspension spring between curved cheeks, we can change the magnitude of the circular deviation. It's theoretically possible to cancel out all the effects of circular deviation by making the cheek shape a perfect cycloid. But Harrison used a perfect radius for his cheeks, which left just enough circular deviation in the system to enable the effects of aerodynamic drag to exactly cancel out the buoyancy effects. The radius of these cheeks can only really be found by experimentation, but for a Harrison 1 second beating pendulum, 3.538 inches is a good starting point. However, there is another complication, and that's the thickness of the suspension spring. It seems that a thicker suspension spring wraps less closely around the cheeks and therefore lessens the effect of the cheek correction. So I'm now going to describe my understanding of the barometric compensation for clock B. And I've drawn these two graphs, which I hope will make things clear. And the first shows a clock with no suspension cheeks, and it has a Harrisonian swing of 6 degrees semi-arc. And if that pendulum was to reduce its swing to 5 degrees, the clock would gain about 18 seconds a day. And likewise, if the swing increased to 7 degrees, the clock would lose about 21 seconds a day. And when the clock came to Greenwich, it had suspension cheeks with a radius of 3.538 inches. And this is the graph that was produced. And it shows that there was a slight overcorrection by the cheeks. So with a reduced arc of 1 degree, the clock would lose roughly a second a day. And with an increased arc of 1 degree, the clock would gain 1 second a day. And actually, we want that effect to be reversed. And if you look at the graph here, it comes up to a hill and then goes down the other side. And this is the portion of the graph that we would like if the graph was shifted over so that that point was at the running arc point. So I'll now just redraw that graph and show you what was eventually achieved. So this is the graph, and you can see that with a thicker suspension spring, which doesn't conform quite so tightly to the cheeks, the effect of the cheeks is lessened. So now you can see that the hill has been shifted to this side of the graph. And for a 1 degree decrease in the amplitude, we get a slight increase in the rate of the clock. And for a 1 degree increase in the amplitude, we get a slight decrease in the rate of the clock, which is exactly where we want to be. So if we go back to our zero-sum game diagram, the aerodynamic drag effect will now cancel out the buoyancy effect. So that sums up my understanding of Harrison's barometric compensation methods, but it is more complicated than that, and there are some second-order effects which I'll briefly touch on now. Harrison's grasshopper escapement is a key element in this holistic balancing act. It's virtually friction-free, requiring no oil, and therefore provides consistent energy to the pendulum. Also, it requires a large pendulum arc to operate, which is essential to our high drag requirements. The action of the grasshopper actually lessens the effect of circular deviation. So at the end of each swing, a weighted composer is lifted, which is a little like having the pendulum running up against an idealized constant force compression spring, which would speed up the pendulum in larger arcs, so cancelling out some of the effects of circular deviation. So if we go back to our graph, you can see that I've drawn this additional red line showing the extra circular deviation correction given by a heavier composer. And you can see this flattens the gradient. And actually, a lighter composer would increase the gradient of the curve. And this just shows that we have another tool in our armory to eventually come up with the perfect barometric error correction. Another second-order effect which I wanted to just briefly touch on is the fact that temperature also affects the density of the air, and so far we've only considered the barometric effect on the density of the air. So when you're producing the perfect temperature compensator pendulum, there is an element in that compensation that will be accounting for the density change. And then when you go on to do the barometric compensation, you're actually removing some of that density change compensation from the temperature part. So you may need to then add a bit of temperature compensation back into the system. This was indeed found to be the case for Clock B. And finally, I just wanted to briefly mention the effects of viscosity. And these effects are probably an order of magnitude less than the aerodynamic drag effects. Again, this is a second order effect and a complex one requiring a good understanding of laminar and turbulent fluid dynamics. I would really appreciate viewers' thoughts on this. My feeling is that increasing viscosity due to a rising temperature may slow the pendulum, and I think that Harrison may have discovered this when he observed the rates of his clocks between the summer and the winter, and this could be why he recommends a pendulum that is slightly shorter when warmer. So that about concludes my understanding of Harrison's barometric compensation. I know I have perhaps been a bit simplistic in my descriptions, and I'm sure that Harrison was thinking about the problem on a much higher level. It is amazing to me that he was able to achieve all this over 250 years ago, when all he had for verifying his theories were 2 clocks, a chimney, and a star. It should be so easy for us now with our fancy electronic timers. 15 minutes is not a great deal of time to explain all the ideas of the great John Harrison and his incredible methods for barometric compensation. But I hope this video may be of assistance to anyone who is planning on making a Harrison-style accurate pendulum clock. And thank you very much for watching.